generating plants very hard and probably simultaneously. We have not hit their oil, even though that's the easiest target of all, because it would not give them even a small chance of survival or rebuilding.
President Trump also addressing gas prices last night, saying that putting the blame on the higher prices at the pump on Iran because of the Strait of Hormuz, but said that the pain would be temporary. And he believes that once the war is over, that the prices will come back down. I want to bring in retired Naval Intelligence Commander and former White House senior advisor, Dr. Paul Chabot. Dr. Chabot, thank you for joining us. As always, good to see you.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
So I want to start just by asking your big takeaways from his speech last night.
Yeah, so when you hear his speech, what we got to remember is this was a very orchestrated, put together remark inside the White House. Unlike a rally or a press conference where he is often off the cuff, these comments were very deliberate and targeted and not just put together largely by the White House, but Department of War, Department of State for messaging, not only to the Americans here at home, but also to our allies and adversaries abroad. It was a relatively short speech, but remember, he kicked this off really trying to unify, talking about our launch to the moon, which we're sure human popularity is very much behind, but then got into the very specifics, which you have mentioned, saying that Iran is no longer a threat, the nuclear sites have been destroyed, that Operation Epic Fury is nearing completion, but that we will go after the energy and oil fields if we do not see movement from Iran to comply. He did address briefly the rising gas prices and then mentioned, well, look, the administration has provided tax cuts, which many families are going to begin to see in an attempt to try to offset what we may be feeling at the pump. He thanked U.S. troops. And he also highlighted the success in Venezuela recently. And what I found fascinating is that he gave a timeline of how long Americans have been at war from World War I all the way to Iraq. And I think that's critical because we're coming up on a 60-day historical sort of deadline where Congress could intervene. Largely, they have not if we go beyond 60 days in a war or a conflict. President Trump did not call it a war yesterday, so I think that was a strategic point as well.
Absolutely. And I did want to ask you as well, because one thing that was notably not talked about as well is the possibility of boots on the ground. From your experience, does that rule out boots being on the ground, or did he just not want to bring up that possibility at that point, do you think?
There was one line specifically, which I think we can all read behind. He talked about the U.S. bombing the nuclear sites throughout Iran. And I think why that's important is because he had a secondary comment. And a secondary comment was that there is basically nuclear radiation or dust up in the air. And what you can read by that is we're not going to put boots on the ground in that environment. He also mentioned we're going to monitor them from our technology, which we clearly have the ability to do. So I think what he did rule out is boots on the ground or special operations, which have been discussed to go into these potential nuclear sites to remove material. I think that is completely off the table now based on the remarks last night. However, Kharg Island and the shores just north of the strait, southern part of Iran, I think still could potentially be in play for boots on the ground, especially now that we've got 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, one in theater and one will be there shortly in a few days, at least for the optics to look like the United States certainly could put boots on the ground in a limited capacity to meet certain objectives with the Strait of Hormuz.
I did think it was interesting, too, the fact that he was talking, he kind of doubled down on his comments that he had put on social media and mentioned in other places, too, saying that if other countries want the Strait of Hormuz open, they should go in and take the oil themselves, basically calling on other countries to possibly get involved in this as well.
Yeah, there were some remarks today. NATO, generally speaking, for the entire NATO membership, maybe not America specifically in this, but saying that NATO is really for the defense of members when under attack, not so much for offensive operations. Very interesting statement out of NATO. Also, France's Emmanuel Macron was on record today saying that opening the strait by force was really unrealistic. At the same time, after Trump spoke last night, at least through the broadcast right now, Iran has shown no backing down. They've been more aggressive, more of a retaliatory. They've talked about tightening the Strait of Hormuz, even controlling it, almost creating a virtual toll booth, if you will, of who can and can't go through. Now, that in itself is a violation of United Nations Convention law of the seas. Any of these straits, no matter how close they are to territorial waters, are protected by international law, which means there are freedom of the seas to transit. That may be an opening, I think, where we could see NATO, European allies, and others discussing, really enforcing the United Nations Convention law of the seas.
That's an interesting possibility there as well. And I don't think, to your point, I don't think that's one people are necessarily discussing or even really know about.
Yeah, and for the most part, historically, nations control about 12 miles of the sea off their coast. But the exception to this has been a law that's been around since 1982 that says any of these straits, and there's about 5 or 6 of them, major ones around the globe, where traffic, commerce, oil go in between. And the law has been set in place so that no nation can do exactly what we're seeing done today. However, laws are only as effective as we're willing to enforce them. And I think that will be a contention point going forward for example, France. If they don't want to use force, okay, what are the negotiations that we're going to use with? And I do want to mention Trump did highlight a positive within someone in the administration, I'm sorry, in Iran, who we are potentially working with. So what I think is happening is we're definitely playing hardball. So is Iran by their hardcore leaders that do not want to see Iran capitulate in any stretch. But there are more level-headed folks coming together through, say, Pakistan, which is helping to communicate messages between the United States and Iran.
Yeah, and to your point, President Trump's talking about the talks that are going on. It has been interesting to see certain comments come out of Iran saying, no, we're not having any direct talks at this point. And I wonder if that point, is it kind of semantics that they're not having direct talks, but maybe working through an intermediary?
It is, and the paradigm of this, if you are in Iran and you are wanting to work on a deal and you're a moderate, you can't come across openly in public like that, for known that the new Ayatollah, the supreme leader, is very anti-American, anti-Israel. You have their National Guard, hundreds of thousands, which are very much anti-American, anti-Israel. But remember, we got an entire population that rose up against their government, are rising up again today in smaller numbers. So there is this balance of how do we communicate with the right people without putting their lives in danger at a moment when we could make some progress. There are back channels going on that we will never know about until history writes about this in the books. But when we look at it historically, this is typically how these things have played out.
So where do you see things going over the next several weeks, over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Do you see it playing out the way President Trump described last night, or what do you think could happen here?
The number one issue right now is the economy. Folks kind of feel like as if Iran, the threat has largely been eliminated. Trump said that in his words yesterday. Right now, it is the stock market, it is oil prices, and it is commodities, which are connected to the economy. Right now, I don't think nations are so much worried about a strike by Iran, nuclear in that capacity. They're worrying about an economic strike on their country. We talk about it here in the US. Are we potentially on a broader recession signal? How is the world looking at this? I think all eyes are going to change for a trajectory about how do we open the Strait of Hormuz peacefully without giving up our rights, without giving up waterways, and not leaving this in a worse place than how we came into it.
Retired Naval Intelligence Commander Dr. Paul Chabot, we always appreciate your perspective on this. Thank you so much for joining us and helping break down these latest developments.
My pleasure. Thank you.
3:09 right now. We